Well, I'm excited to have a guest with us today. Dave Runyon helps faith, business, universities, and government leaders unite around common causes in the Denver metro area. He serves as the Executive Director of CityUnite and as a consultant for businesses who have a desire to give back to their communities. Previously, Dave was a pastor actually at Foothills Community Church and then at Next Level Church. And in 2010, he launched a neighboring movement with his book, The Art of Neighboring, that has now spread to over 1,500 communities, maybe even more than that, all around the country. Dave graduated from Colorado State University, where he studied history and secondary education. He speaks locally and nationally, encouraging leaders to work together for the good of their cities. Dave and his wife, Lauren, have 4 children. I'm excited to have the author of The Art of Neighboring with us, and we'll have some time here for him to share some words, and I know many of us have questions to pepper him with as well. So, Dave, thank you for joining us from Colorado today.
It's great to be on with you, David.
I know that this neighboring concept is something you have talked about with lots of government entities and cities and universities as well. And hopefully maybe you can kind of open with that and let us know what that kind of looks like for those types of organizations and in those settings.
Yeah, well, I fell into this backwards. I was part of a group of leaders about 11 years ago that were coming together trying to figure out if we were going to serve our city together, what's the smartest thing that we would go after? And so a lot of the people in the room were faith leaders, including myself at the time. And so we had our mayor in the room, and we asked our mayor, tell us a little bit about your story. And so we're getting to know him. And then we said, hey, if you could wave a magic wand and change something in our community, what would it be? And he had this laundry list of great ideas. He said, I want to live in a community where there's no single moms below the poverty line, where there's no at-risk kids, there's no financial debt or elderly shut-ins. And so he's got this laundry list of things. He gets done with it, and he says at the end, he goes, if you guys wanted to do something that would change our city the most, you should start a neighboring movement. And then he kind of said that in passing and just went on. And we're like, no, talk more about that. And he said, what we're learning at the city level is that relationships trump programs. And that when people are connected based on proximity, it takes a lot of weight off of the systems that the city is trying to create for people in need. And it was such a profound moment, especially for a lot of the people in the room that were faith leaders of different faith backgrounds, but all the faith backgrounds, have this idea of love your neighbor interwoven into their core teaching. And we're sitting there listening to our mayor say, hey, if all you faith leaders would just do what you say is one of the most basic tenants, it would change our city overnight, which was incredibly convicting for me and for a lot of the people in the room. And it just sent me on a journey, David, of going back to the basics and starting to think about this idea of like, who are the people that live 30, 40, 50 feet away from me? How much time and energy am I putting into actually just being available or getting to know these people? And then what a profound difference it makes when we begin to be connected with the people that live around us, and when people do that at scale. And so it's been a wild ride over the last 11 years. I just keep taking the next step. It started with really basic thoughts for me. When I had this moment with our mayor, I had met all of my neighbors, but most of them I didn't remember their names. And so for me, it was going back and just doing small things of like grabbing my neighbor and seeing him outside and going, hey, listen, I know we've met 3 times. I forgot your name. And then just doing little things, writing down their names, using their names when I see them, not driving 20 minutes for a round trip for 2 things from the grocery store when I could actually just borrow something and replenish it later. And so it's the small things that make a big difference in this whole world. And I've been really encouraged, and I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid on neighboring, David. I can't go back now.
And you're getting others to drink along with you.
Yeah, well, now we're talking cult leader stuff. So it's not that. I want to be really clear. It's not that we're not running a cult here.
But you have at least 1,500 communities. That was the information I found, I think, in the back of your book, maybe more than that now,
Yeah.
that have grasped onto this idea of neighboring. So if that many communities have grabbed onto it, there must be something to it. Must be a benefit that local government has seen as well out of this.
Oh, for sure. I mean, in our own city, we saw a huge decrease in the number of calls to code enforcement. So we started this whole movement around know your neighbors' names, retain their names, use their names, and then throw good parties. And so that's what we did in our city. And after about 3 years, we started to see this significant decrease in calls to code enforcement. And this is this isn't like verifiable data, but our city leaders came back and said the only thing we can explain this is that people know each other better, and so they're picking up the phone and calling us less, and they're actually walking across the street more, which was really, really encouraging.
Yes, one of the cities I work with, we actually tracked phone calls to the city switchboard for 2 months.
Yeah,
And the city administrator looked at that, and his estimate was that 80% of those phone calls could be taken care of or eliminated if people just knew each other.
that's right. That's exactly right.
So that can be a big help to city government, law enforcement, probably law enforcement.
Yeah,
But
yeah. A lot of times that code enforcement is under the law enforcement. It's one of the things that takes up a lot of time.
is, there used to be, there was a big trend toward neighborhood watch several decades ago. Groups got together, they got their sign from the police, they put their sign up at their neighborhood, and then maybe never ever got together again, but at least they had their sign that said, this neighborhood has a neighborhood watch. You're talking about something completely different than just a neighborhood watch program.
Yeah, and the neighborhood watch movement has faded some. I think there was a lot of well-intentioned people. The primary focus was on safety. So it was a little bit of like, we've got to band together and make sure that we keep crime out of our neighborhood. So that's a little bit different posture than what we come at it with. We come at it with, hey, listen, the difference between living in a neighborhood where you know the people who live around you and you're connected to those people, or living in a neighborhood that's isolated and where everybody just shuts their garage door, the difference between living in those two neighborhoods is massive. It's massive. It affects the way that we live and the way we experience. I mean, I personally, I could probably live in a little bit nicer house, but or a lot nicer house, but I love what I have in my neighborhood. I'm not going anywhere. I know that like there's been years of equity built in and connection, and it's really valuable to me personally. And I think most people, when you begin to talk with them, they know that. And the difference between having neighborhoods in those two categories is just, are the people in those neighborhoods willing to create a little bit of margin to start getting to know each other and just be available, just be visible, just spend time in your front yard is one of the best things we can do. And so the neighborhood watch thing, I think is really well intentioned. It hasn't produced the kind of results that they had hoped. And I think when you do neighboring, when you just start to do little things in your neighborhood and you start to think holistically about it, you get the crime piece. Okay. Like, what's the book? Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam states that in neighborhoods where people know the first names of their neighbors, the crime rate is 80% less than in neighborhoods where they don't. And so he's got a lot of research around that. And so when you go after the holistic connecting with people, you get the crime stuff, because if you know your neighbor next door and a U-Haul truck pulls up and you know that they're not moving, you actually reach out and talk to them. You do something about it. It happens organically, not out of this like kind of crusader mentality of we got to all stop crime together.
Yeah, and safety is a big component. That's what people want in a neighborhood, so it can
Yeah.
come about in this way. That's awesome. It is a bit of a foreign concept to people still. I know I have a neighbor that we delivered a Kringle to at Christmas time, sang a Christmas carol, handed him the Kringle, and the lady said, "What do we owe you?" And I'm like, well, one, we don't sing that good. My family doesn't. We should probably owe you something. But we don't. You don't owe us anything. We're just being neighborly. And it was just, you could tell something she had never experienced in her life. It was really
Yeah.
kind of a foreign concept to her. It probably
It
is to a
is.
lot of people.
It is, and I think before this current pandemic that we're in, the pace of life for everybody is so intense that the value of neighboring was kind of on the downswing. And then we commute to a lot of places a lot more than we used to, and we haven't built our houses and our neighborhoods in the same way that everything used to be geared towards the front yard with a patio, with all those things, and now in a lot of suburban environments, everything's geared towards the backyard. So there's a lot of different reasons over the last 30 years that kind of the value of neighboring has dipped a little bit, but there are some good signs that it's starting to come back up. And I think people want it. They're thirsting for it. It's something that they really miss. You talk to most people, they go, oh, I remember what it was like when I grew up. I wish I still had that. And so, and I see more and more people, a lot of what we're doing is helping people rediscover the art of neighboring.
Well, I can't build a front porch onto my house, but I can set a lawn chair in my driveway.
That's right.
And it really ends up having the same sort of effect. We call it Front Yard Fridays around our place,
Oh, I love it.
and people do come walking by, and it's a lot easier to have conversations. You
Yeah.
mentioned in one of your comments about having margin in our lives. Now, what do you mean with that? That sounds like crazy talk.
Yeah. Well, I think because of some of the advances in technology, especially in the last 20 years, with the fact that we're all walking around with a computer in our pocket now, most people, when they leave work, they don't actually leave work. And so, and this has just kind of become a way of living is the work, people actually, when they used to leave work, they were done working. I know that's a foreign concept. So then you would be done working, then you'd come home and, and you weren't sitting there all the time checking an email, a text, continuing. And so there was this sense of, hey, when you're working hard, work hard. And when you're not working, don't work. By the way, I actually think that's the best way to live. I don't think like having the accelerator down all the time is real sustainable. But when you're never really off, it affects the amount of time that you have to engage with the people that live closest to you. And so margin's a big deal. My wife and I have talked about, and try to check each other and go, hey, are we living in a way in which we're actually interruptible? For a long time, I don't think my neighbors experienced me as an interruptible person. Or somebody who is very visible. And I think those are two, and it's been rejuvenating for me and for my family. And it's it seems countercultural, and this has been one of the great gifts of COVID is more people have margin around their homes than ever before. I've seen more of my neighbors out everywhere you go, people talking. I've seen more of my neighbors, visibly seen them during this season than I ever have before. And so I think it's one of the silver linings is people have been able to connect just because they've been more visible and they've just been around more.
Yeah, without that, I mean, I hear people say things like, "Oh, I'm a good neighbor. I get together with the parents on my child's basketball team, and maybe those are it's a traveling team and they're spread around everywhere, and that's how I do my neighboring." But yet, they don't know the people that are living next door to them. They come home and shut the garage door. So what's up with that? Is that?
Oh, I can speak from experience, David. I lived like that for a long time. Because I think subconsciously I didn't want to get to know my neighbors because I didn't know what was going on behind that door. I had this bad feeling it was going to be messy. And guess what? Now that I've got to know my neighbors, it is messy. It is. But it's also beautiful at the same time. And so I just think, when you just get in your car and a lot of people will go, listen, I'm really into stuff going on at my local rescue mission or volunteering at this place or that place. And I'm like, that's great. Do you know there's real needs though, like right outside your front door? You may live in a really affluent place. There's real needs. There's real people who you can connect with and make a difference in their lives. And and so my neighborhood, I've found that to be true. And for a long time, I just didn't even know what was going on because I wasn't very present. And so I think I get it. The people who are like, yeah, I do neighboring with the people on my sports team or at work and all that kind of stuff. I go, yeah, that's awesome. Those are really important relationships. but those people that live around you too, if you'll lean into that, you'll find some amazing things. And I think too, this has been one of the things that I didn't see coming. When you, it's really easy in our culture to just spend time with people who think about the world the way that you do. And I think this is why there's such a polarization right now in our culture. I think it's one of the most toxic things going on. The beauty of actually getting to know the people who live right around you is if you start getting to know people based on proximity, you're guaranteeing yourself that you're going to be hanging out with people who think about the world differently than you do. Okay. I mean, like I have been my one neighbor down the street, one of the people I'm closest to in my whole neighborhood. I mean, he is a raging libertarian, like all the ways you could ever imagine. And I don't have anything against libertarians or anything, but that's not who I am. But he and I talk about things, and we talk about the way that we view the world differently and get into things. But we're, at the end of the day, we're still friends. Like our friendship in what we have supersedes our differences about the way that we think decisions should be made about the economy or about politics or all that stuff. And I think that's what we need more of. I think that's what that's what we need more of in our world. We need people who are connected to each other, even though they have very different opinions about politics or the economy or how we should be handling issues with the poor. And so I didn't see that coming, and I would just encourage anybody who's listening to this, if you start to base relationships on proximity, one of the gifts is that you're going to get to know people who have very different opinions than you do and who see the world differently than you do. And I think that's really important right now.
Until I started reaching out to my neighbors, I had no idea of the diversity that was in my neighborhood.
Right.
I live in a suburban town. I live in a nice neighborhood. Everybody around me looked the same as me, a little different age demographics and stuff. But it wasn't really until I started trying to get to know them that I realized, well, they may look like me, but they're not like me at all.
Right.
I mean, there was it was, and people can be messy, like you said,
Yeah.
but you also discover diamonds in the rough and gold mines of talent and different experiences right around you that I never really bothered to even search for.
Can I say one thing, David, because I skipped over it earlier? This is the key to everything that happened in my neighborhood. There's this little, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, kind of, no, it's going in and out. Something weird is happening to my computer. There it is. So it's really simple. This is a refrigerator magnet. It looks like a tic-tac-toe board. So I didn't have a refrigerator magnet, but if you want to know where to start, okay, oh my goodness, that's AP graduate level stuff right there, David. Here's what happened here was where my wife and I started, and then we've just been following the breadcrumbs ever since. So if you're out there, you're listening to this, and you want to figure out, okay, I like some of these ideas. Maybe you don't, but you just want to try it or do an experiment. I took a napkin, a tic-tac-toe board, and in the middle I put my house, and then those 8 squares around it represented the 8 closest households to me. And then I just sat there, and first, without doing anything, my buddy who wrote the book with me, Jay, he did this, like, he goes, hey, we're all gonna do a test. So here's my test for all the listeners, okay? You think about your house, then you think about the 8 closest houses or apartments or ranches, wherever you live. Think about the 8 most logical ones, and then just write down the names of the adults in those 8 places. And I remember doing this for the first time. I'm sitting there, and I had that moment. I could write down both adults' names in 2 of those 8 boxes. And like I said before, I had this moment. I'm like, oh no, I've met all these people. And it was really convicting to me, because I had to come face to face with the fact that most of these people, I had met them, but they weren't important enough to me for me to remember their name. And so I put this little napkin up on my fridge, and I started to have some of those awkward conversations of just, admitting to people I didn't know their name. And I could have looked it up online. I could have gone and checked out their mail, although I think that's that's illegal. But there's something about having a face-to-face interaction with people, of admitting, like, hey, I know we've met before, I didn't know your name. And then I did something really important. I started to write those down. So I wrote them down. I put them in a visible place. So now all of a sudden I went from, hey man, to hey Matt. That's a huge difference. Hey man to hey Matt it's massive. And then to just using somebody's name when you see them, And then it's just fascinating how it happens organically over time. You begin to just go, hey, did you see the end of that game? Did you, could you have like 5 minutes? Could you help me just move something in my garage? Like I just need to move it from one side to the other. And all that stuff is really important to neighborhoods and to development, but it never happens if you don't learn their name. And so a big part of what we do is say there's great value in learning and retaining and using somebody's name. And this little tic-tac-toe board that you put on your fridge, and that's a great tool. And it gives you this visual of like going, how well am I doing in my neighborhood? And so for me and my wife, and for a lot of our friends here, and for the movement that we started here, this little simple tic-tac-toe board on your fridge was the secret sauce. And so, sorry, I went on a tangent there. I forgot how important that is. I wanted to make sure that we mentioned it.
Yeah, that is important. And it does, I know for me, it went from, hey, Terry, to Terry saying, hey, you want some tomatoes out of my garden? I mean, it had tangible benefits.
Yeah.
But also, I've not always been very good at receiving. And so I've had to learn that too. When people make offers to give help or to do things, I have to get better at receiving myself.
It's the quickest way to build relationships inside of a neighborhood. Like I'm one of those people that I go in trying to fix every problem, trying to serve everybody. So when I first started into this, I'm going to put on my little, super neighbor cape and start figuring out, oh, I wonder if there's a widow and on my block, and if her fence needs, and that's all good. That's all really good and well-meaning. Even like, oh, I'm going to cook something and take it. That's important. Don't not do that. But if you're always in that mode, like real relationships are two-way streets. And so if you're always in the mode of, I'm the person serving, I'm the person like delivering stuff, and you're that person that looks like you always have your stuff together, there's a ceiling on those types of relationships. And it took me a while to figure this out. And just doing something small, like seeing somebody who loves their garden and asking, like, hey, if I was going to do a garden, if you're curious, like just asking for advice. My one neighbor's lawn, it looks like it's off of a golf course, and my lawn's right next to it, and it doesn't look like that at all. And so a while back, I looked at him, I said, all right, hey, tell me what's going on over here. Tell me what you do here that I'm not doing. And he just came alive. He started sharing. He's like, okay, January, I'm laying down this fertilizer here. I'm watering this many times. And he gave me an 8-minute sermon on how to like care for a lawn. And it was January to December. And when he got done, I remember thinking to myself, I didn't say this out loud, but I remember thinking to myself, man, that is totally not worth it. But I didn't say that out loud. I just said, I could see how passionate he was. There was an exchange happened just by me asking about something he's passionate about. And that same thing happens, these little exchanges happen when you ask to borrow something, that you need, instead of going and spending $40 on it at Home Depot when you're only going to use it once a year, or whatever it is. And so what you just touched on there, David, the art of receiving is huge. It's huge. And I think for some of us, if you find yourself as one of those people who you're always the one serving, you're always the one taking the initiative, like that's good, but maybe take the initiative to invite somebody to meet a deficit that you have in your life, instead of always, thinking I've got to be the one with the answers. You'll be shocked at what the payout is.
Sounds like you may be more of a xeriscape type of guy.
Maybe
a front yard full of rocks. I've seen it work. This is going back to the topic of racial strife and things. I was asked this last week, and I actually wrote it down. I was asked a few weeks ago by an African-American man who said he was the only person of color in his neighborhood, and he was a bit scared of even trying to make relationships, but also wondered if doing so would help or hurt the cause.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you about a couple experiences from my neighborhood. So we don't have any African-American neighbors right now in our little loop of 40. with several Latino families. My immediate next door neighbor is from Laos. And when we first moved in, we always just saw there was just always people from Laos, that just looked different than us. And then they would cook this food that smelled amazing. It would kind of come wafting over, but it didn't smell like food that like we would eat. And they would have these huge parties, and everyone there looked like them. And I just kind of thought in the back of my mind, oh, I was, I don't know, I was a little bit intimidated of like what it would be like. It seemed like their whole world were people who had come in the last two generations from either Laos or Cambodia or Thailand. And so over time, it's like 2 or 3 years, and I knew their name. Their names are Pet and Home. And I remember just like getting curious about their food and just saying like, hey, um, you know, would you ever be like, could we just come over and like have you introduce our kids to what Laotian food is, which is pretty similar to Thai food, I've learned, by the way. And so we did that, and in doing that, starting to learn, like to connect with them. And then we started to ask about their story. It was an amazing story of actually coming over at the end of the war and how they actually ended up in the Denver metro area. It's unbelievable. It's this beautiful, incredible story that our kids and my wife and I have been exposed to and get to know them. But I remember asking them, they for the longest, I was sitting there thinking, they don't want us in their world. They seem really busy and who they're hanging out with. And of course they looked at us and like, we're immigrants. We didn't think you actually wanted to hang out with us. And so here's like these two, like I'm sitting right next door to this neighbor, and we're both making these assumptions about each other and about what we want and who we are. And so I think getting to know them has broken down a lot of those assumptions. And I would tell your friend that asked the question, I would just say, listen, go for it. And it's going to be weird. It's going to be messy. But you have more to lose by not going for it than you do by going for it. And I would say we just need to have grace with each other. When our kid says something dumb, that's not culturally appropriate, I'm begging and hoping this is a great learning moment for my child, and I'm begging and hoping for grace on the other side too. And I've received it over and over again. I just feel like it's been amazing. And so I will say this too about a lot of the stuff that's going on right now culturally around race is that in my neighborhood, when George Floyd stuff popped, and when the reaction and the response from all of our communities came, because we don't have a lot of African Americans in our actual loop, there was still a group of us that were like going, what do we do in this moment? Here we are in this suburban area. What does it look like? And so it's been really, really great. There's another couple in our neighborhood. We just started to watch like documentaries and then hang out once a week for an hour and just talk about what we're watching. And we don't always agree on everything. But it's been the most tangible thing for me. And I'm involved in all kinds of stuff. I'm involved in stuff at the city level with our mayor and with different things. And all that stuff's great, but it seems to sit up high. And a lot of times that stuff, these conversations that we're having about race and about, how to be inclusive, how I always am asking, how does this actually hit the ground in real life? And so for me, just to be connected, my wife and I, with another neighbor couple, and to be able to go over and to watch some things that are challenging us and that are helping expand our worldview, and then to be processing it together has been really, really, it's been really important for my own development and for my wife's and for the way I'm seeing the world and for this moment that we're living in.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else want to follow up with that? You have another related question to that topic? Anybody? See, I'm an old newspaper guy, so I could fill a whole hour, probably two, with just peppering you with questions. And I do have at least one more that I've already thought about in advance, but then I kind of want to open it up a little bit to
Great.
others who may have questions, because I think they bring maybe different perspectives to this issue and may have different concerns and needs about that. But the other one I was going to ask you about, and you alluded to it very early on, maybe not even before the recording was on, is about how this can be made tangible or how it relates to university students.
Yeah.
You spoke to that a little bit.
Yeah, we've done some work with universities, and a lot of times it's with universities, undergraduate, trying to figure out how do we help our students be great neighbors? How do we help our students, connect with people who aren't part of the university but live in that town, and to avoid kind of the adversarial stuff that can happen. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of times, like I'm getting called in because there's been a history of bad situations that have happened, and they're thinking, how can we lay the groundwork so we can have less animosity between the people who are living in the community and the students themselves. And so I'll just talk to the undergraduate students right now that are listening to this. Like, I just encourage you, like, take the time to just walk across the street and like, you wouldn't imagine what a difference it makes at the start of the semester if you'll just go across the street and make it a point when you see any of your neighbors out to go and take the initiative. Like, I'm just going to tell you, so I'm not a student anymore. I have been a student in the past. I live near Boulder. When a student actually takes initiative, it just sets the tone for, like, oh my goodness, like, because we have a lot of the people, especially, a lot of the people in these communities, they live there, and then the houses are rentals, and so the kids are coming in and out of the houses over and over again. So, and maybe they've got some baggage. Okay, so know that there's some baggage. And if you go over and just introduce yourself to the person who's living out there, and you make it a point to learn their name, it will tilt them, and it'll just take a lot of that baggage and dissolve it away. And so I would just encourage you to think about, and to think, if for universities, for your leader, if you're a university leader, what does it look like for you to equip your students with the desire and a tool to go and do that? And so I would just encourage you, like, I think it's one of the best things universities can do when it comes to community relations, is just planting the seed with students to take the initiative to learn names and to use people's names when they see them. It makes a massive difference. So there's my word to anybody out there, to students and to, university leaders that are working primarily with undergraduate students inside towns, where they're living on, in the city.
Well, in the university saying, we're talking a lot about being engaged, or engagement is kind of the
Yeah.
phrase. And so with this class we're doing, I've been talking a lot about becoming an engaged neighbor,
Yeah.
kind of meshing the two words and ideas. So neighboring, engagement, you kind of see that working together.
Huge.
Different.
Huge. Neighboring's like the engagement for dummies. Um, the engagement's that next level of, like, doing that, but I think they're the same. And so, but I think a lot of what we've done, and I think this has been the biggest leadership lesson I've learned through this whole thing, David. I mean, I think that little tic-tac-toe refrigerator magnet, a lot of people just make those on their own, but then we made a magnet and we've given them out to people. We've given out 380,000 magnets now. So there's 380,000 households, that theoretically have this thing sitting on their fridge. And I think the thing I've learned through this whole deal, my whole life, most people told me, Dave, good leaders set the bar high. Good leaders set the bar high. And I think that's true. Like, if you're working with a small team, you set the bar high. People will either come close to the bar or they'll get over it. But what I've learned about starting a movement, the key isn't to set the bar high. The key is to set the bar so low that people can't crawl underneath it. And it's so, like, we didn't come into this neighboring thing saying we're going to start crime watch and do all, and we're going to, like, start a massive block party movement. We just came into this thing saying, hey, would you just be willing to learn and retain and use your neighbors' names? I mean, we set the bar that low. And when you set the bar that low, it's shocking. The number of people that'll do it goes through the roof. And what we got lucky with is we set the bar low, and the learning people's names, it's a Trojan horse to get them to do all kinds of other stuff. Because, like learning a name is like stepping on a moving sidewalk. You kind of learn that name, and then all of a sudden all these other things start, all these other dominoes with some of your name. Some of my neighbors are just busy. I learned their name and they just kind of go on and live pretty secluded lives. But you learn 8 of your neighbors' names with some of those people, you're going to start a domino falling that's going to lead to a lot of other stuff. And so that's why I just keep going back to the name thing.
Yeah, perfect. And then it can, a couple of my neighbors on either side have taken the idea, and they've gotten to know the 8 neighbors around them. So it
Hey, can you
expand
show
us
me?
out.
Can you show me your chart again? Give the things that I am.
I'm
You're gonna send me
obsessive
a.
compulsive. Um,
You're gonna send me the. Okay, people. You're only supposed to do 8. It's only supposed to be a tic-tac-toe board. But David threw on 2 more columns. He'll probably have 2 more added on next time we talk to him. So that's really cool. It's
that
really cool.
there's a lot of variety on that page. I'm just here to tell you.
Yep.
And you're talking about not knowing. There was a neighbor within that group that a year ago her family had to move her out of the house. It was a hoarding situation.
Yeah.
And had to clean out. You would have had no idea from looking at the outside. I had no idea. And there's things like that happen that come up, and I'm like, wow, if I'd have known as a neighbor, how could I have helped? How would that situation have played out differently if other neighbors had known or been
That's
able to
right.
be involved?
And yeah, I agree. On my block, there was a person who was probably on the verge. It wasn't probably, but was growing older, getting more isolated, didn't have family around, and then as the neighbors started to get to know her, a lot of those needs started to get met. And so this is a person who was heading towards a retirement home and all of the costs associated with that, but just through relationship and just through people was able to really safely and happily stay in the place that she was living for a lot of it longer, saved a ton of money. And then the benefit to us, the relationships, it's not always about, this stuff doesn't just change the people you live around, it changes you. And so that was one of the huge things for learning lessons for us as we went through this. So
How about some others on the call here? Some questions from you all.
yeah, fire away.
So Dave, I'd like to know how transparent you are with your tic-tac-toe board when you go and you ask your neighbors, what's your name, and introduce yourself. Do you let them know really what you're doing?
No, I'm just like, I don't have anything that and I've got that tic-tac-toe board on my fridge. So my neighbors come over and like, hey, why is my name on your fridge? I'm like, oh, because I'm not good at remembering names. And I think it's really important to remember people's names. And so this was a tool that we used when we first started doing this. And so, I don't walk over there with my tic-tac-toe board in front of them and like go, hey, by the way, I'm doing this little exercise where I fill in all my neighbors' names. But for me, it's just like, we hand it out to anytime somebody new moves into our neighborhood. Now we have a block directory now too, where it has the kids' names and phone numbers and emails in our little loop of 40. And so we have that. Anytime somebody moves in, we give them the block directory, and then we give them and it's not always me. Sometimes some of my other neighbors are amazing neighbors too. And then we give them a refrigerator magnet. Say, hey, this is a great way. You're going to be buried with names as everybody comes and introduces you. And themselves to you. So this is a great way to remember like the closest ones to you. So like, yeah, it's just everything's on the table. So that's a great question though, Pamela. All right. Anybody else?
Others.
Who's got some hard questions? Like you're thinking of somebody right now in your neighborhood. You're like, I do not want to get to know this person.
Or you're thinking of how does this apply to what we're trying to do?
Yeah, anything. Yeah, I know all this stuff always brings up some interesting questions.
You mentioned how the COVID-19 has kind of given us some margin in our lives, but also people are a little more reluctant to go into a relationship now. So what's been the experience, on maybe the downside of not necessarily, when I think about meeting a neighbor, the first thing I always do is I want to shake their hand.
Right.
Now I have to spend, at least 6 feet away and maybe wear a mask, or maybe not, depending on my neighbor, So.
Yeah, great question, Jay. The biggest downside, honestly, is about a third of our population has like a really strong opinion that this whole thing is massively overblown and they feel really strongly about that. Another third of our population feels incredibly strong that that if you're doing anything irresponsible, not having a mask anytime you're walking out your side of your front door, that that you're being a bad human being. And then there's a third of people that are in the middle and just going, this whole thing's been so confusing. I'm still trying to like figure out what's happening. So like when you have like these passionate extremes, when you have people interacting from both of those, it's really difficult, and especially inside of a neighborhood. And so that's been the hardest part, is helping people and encouraging people. Hey, can you just respect that, like, your neighbor may have a totally different view about this than you do? And so can you just kind of try to be kind and thoughtful about how they're thinking about it? And maintain and continue to stay connected as neighbors. So I think that's the hardest thing that's happening right now in our culture around it. And then I think, and David, you can make this available to people. We've got like a COVID-19 informed neighboring toolkit. Like, how do you, and we made it really early, like back in April. And so, but it's just, here's some ideas and some thoughts about how can, the term social distancing is horrible. We should have been talking about physical distancing the whole time. And a lot of the experts, I'm not saying anything new, a lot of the people, even in health departments, have talked about this now too. So how do we do physical distancing, but then take advantage of this moment to take some next steps with our neighbors? And so, David mentioned having his lawn chair out in the front yard. I mean, one of the best things that's happened during this time is that we just have started the practice of being out in our front yard, in our neighbors' driveways, and we're just taking our lawn chairs, hanging out, and there'll be a few more feet than normal between us, but we're just spending time together with a lot of neighbors that we hadn't connected with before. And so, so it's been really good. But yes, Jay, I think for sure there's some challenges. Just like it feels like everything in our world has more challenges right now. And that's true with neighboring as well.
Well, we can't as easily invite people over into our homes,
right?
But you can still invite them to your front yard, park, or wherever where you can maintain some physical distance. I like that concept instead of social distancing.
Yeah, and David, I'll send you that tool. I'll send you that toolkit. It's got like 5 or 6 practical ideas of, like, COVID informed neighboring practices.
Okay. Other questions from within the group?
I do have a question. So when I introduced myself, I told you I live on a farm, and my closest neighbors are at least probably a mile away, but any given direction. So Dave, do you have any examples where in the past you've worked with rural communities or someone that's tried to do this in kind of the outskirts of a community?
Yeah, great question, Jackie. It is different because most people in the United States, the majority of people live in single family homes. It's easy to like do this stuff and only talk about single family homes. It's really different in apartments, and it's really different in large, rural environments where you're living on acres and not, not little bitty units. And so and I'll speak to both of these really quickly. For rural environments, it's the hardest because you're not seeing each other all the time. But in rural environments, there's usually kind of more people are lean towards this a little bit more, and there's a lot of interaction that happens around boundaries, whether it's fences, whether it's different types of, animals getting, so there is this sense of kind of, hey, like, we look out for each other in rural environments that exists it's a little bit higher, that happens more often than it does in city or suburban environments. And so I would encourage you on the rural piece, the stuff that I've seen that works the best is to go, hey, like, listen, I can't believe we've lived next to each other this long. Like, we just want to have you over for a meal. It's like you have to take a jump. You don't have as many touches by just seeing them every single day in the front yard. And so I would just encourage you to take that other jump of like I can't believe we live, let's just have you over, which is for some people that's really intimidating. But that's where we've seen the most success in rural environments, is just to actually invite somebody into your place, into your farm, into your ranch, whatever it is, for the first time. And so that's where we've seen the most fruit on that end. In apartments are closer, they're more packed in. You would think that people would be more connected in apartment environments because of the density. That's actually not the case, because there's a lot of turnover in apartments, and in apartments you have such a small amount of space. There's something mentally that happens that you're kind of like, I just got to get into my refuge and like and just be there and not like, and there's a lot of noise issues because you have shared walls. So those are the downsides. That's what makes it hard with apartments and condos. The great thing is you have community space. And so in apartments and condos, we've just seen incredible ideas of people just saying, all right, we're doing happy hour every Friday in the lobby from 4 to 6. Or some people have a pool. That, you know, you just have this common space where people have started card games and they've just looking for common interests and using the common space of an apartment to invite people to be a part of it. And so that's what we really encourage people to do on that side of things.
We did a local class discussion really on this topic back during the winter time, and there was a young professional in there, a couple of years out of college, that lived in a apartment complex, and I think it was in February, maybe even January, because he's young and what was cold weather to him, and and he decided to just take his girl out and cook some hot dogs and see who came and get to know people that way. He ran out of hot dogs. He had several neighbors say, hey, why don't we do this more often? Should we do this once a week? Another neighbor said, I'll buy the hot dogs next time. I mean, he found that they were all living close to each other, extremely isolated, but really longing for some sort of community and interaction, even in the apartment complex.
That's right. Yep. I've heard story after story like that in relation to apartments and condos.
Any other questions from anyone?
I was just kind of along the lines of what Jackie said, but grew up in a very rural area where we knew half our maybe related even to half of our neighbors, both my husband and I, and we're both tend to be more along the lines of introverts. So it's just not good when it's both of us. That it's almost painful to go up, you know, once we meet someone, it's fine and we're fine. But that initial, any other advice or tips of how to get past that, I think.
Yeah,
make it less painful.
Great question. I get this question a lot, as you might imagine. What I always encourage introverts to do, you don't have to be somebody else, but think about the things that you're already into and look for ways to invite your neighbors into that. So if you're into the gardening thing, like just say, hey, listen, I want to do coffee this week with anybody that's doing the gardening thing, just to swap best practices. If your husband is, you know, diehard, you know, who would it be out there? Are you guys Chiefs fans? Rams fan? Or not Ram? What are we out there?
No,
well, we're certainly not Denver Bronco fans.
Yeah, I know that.
We're not really into sports, so.
We're not really into sports. Yeah, okay. So, you know, what is it? Is it car? Like, so
yeah.
What you are passionate about, invite people into that. If it's cooking, if it's whatever it is. And then I would say this, get out of your comfort zone just a little bit. You'll like it. Yeah, like it's such, I can just tell, like the way that you asked the question, Sarah, was, you know, once we get over this hump, the hard thing in neighboring, it's the key to neighboring is being willing to lean into some mildly awkward moments. So it's mildly awkward to invite somebody over for the first time. It's mildly awkward to ask somebody about their lawn or their garden. It's mildly awkward to admit that you don't know somebody's name. But those, if you're just willing to lean into those mildly awkward moments, the payout on the other end is massive. And so that'd be my encouragement.
That is a good encouragement. Well, we may be winding down. I'm not sure if anyone else has a question they want to jump in on. I know I'll add this, Dave. I know you've worked with a lot of communities. Is there a community or two that you would hold up as like a great example of where they've done this really well, maybe in partnership with the city, maybe a community or two that might be case study worthies, perhaps, or maybe there have been some case studies done on what they've done really well?
Well, one of them comes to mind is Midland, Michigan. They had a mayor 8 or 9 years ago that reached out to us and just said, hey, listen, I don't know if any of the faith communities in my city have ever like know each other or work together, but I love this neighboring idea. Would you come out here and help me gather these faith communities and then try to start a movement out of that, you know, from them with business leaders? And they've got Dow Chemical and a lot of stuff there. And so it's neat to watch business, faith, and government work together around that. And then, you know, most recently they had a dam break and a flood go through their city, and to watch after years of building these types of relationships and seeing neighbors, start to connect together, you see the fruit of this in crisis a lot. And so when there is a crisis, it's just this spotlight on where do neighbors know each other. This happened in New Orleans with Katrina. And I think it was, I can't remember if it was 60 Minutes or 2020, literally went block to block and was showing this block is rebuilt, this one isn't. And they started to actually ask what was the difference. And they said the difference was, as neighbors, we helped each other rebuild this block because we knew each other and we know each other for a long time. And then the block next to it that was completely decimated still, it was a place where that didn't happen. And so it's just been this reminder to me over and over again of why this makes such a big difference.
Wow. Okay, two great examples there to look at. Thank you for that. Well, National Good Neighbor Day is coming up September 28th. So
wow, I did not know that, David.
It is. There's National Good Neighbor Day, signed into law by Jimmy Carter. That's on September 28th. And then there is a Be Kind to Your Neighbor Day, which isn't a national holiday, but it shows up on a lot of calendars. I believe it's March 16th. So there's one in the fall, one in the spring.
Well, one good thing to look up, I would say, is there's a movement called Neighborhood Night Out. And this is a national movement. And a lot of cities participate in it. And there's a lot of them have grants where they say, hey, we'll take care of all the food if you want to throw a block party, we'll take care of all the food. So if you go to National Neighborhood Night Out and to go to that website, there's some good tools there. And then you can find out if your city is one of the cities that participates and is engaged in it.
Okay.
And if your city isn't, reach out to them. Say, hey, here's this program. It's happening. It happens all across the country. Could we start something like this in our city?
Well, and you have a great kit put together that we've used about ideas about putting together a block party and sort of a checklist to go through. And that's a real fantastic tool that you have on your website too that we've used. I know we've tried goodies in the garage and that worked real well. I tried donuts on the driveway only to discover that many of my neighbors don't like donuts and several of them were trying to be gluten-free. So I was left with boxes of donuts. And I'm just, really opposed to waste. So I did my part with the donuts on the driveway.
Yeah, way to go.
This year I'm needing to come up with something that doesn't maybe involve food that's going to end up back in my house. But they're fun.
I'll say this, Halloween's coming up. That's a great time. Like that's a time where it's normal to knock on your neighbor's front door. And I've seen a lot of people do neat stuff with Halloween where they just do something out in the front yard and every kid comes up and they're meeting, it gives you a chance to meet some of the families and people around. So I'm just amazed at how creative people are. And when you give them vision to connect with the people around them, the amazing ways that they do that. It's really neat, including you, David. You're a practitioner in this, you're living this stuff out. And that's the real key. I mean, for this to spread and to lead this well, you actually have to do it in your own life. So it's inspiring to hear what you're up to. Well,
it certainly provides lots of examples to give when you're talking to people, personal examples. Well, I appreciate your time today. I really don't, I'm not saying this to flatter you really, but the book was a big change moment for me. And you really are kind of the national expert on this topic. When you look for neighboring or books on neighboring, there's really not any. I mean, you're kind of the first one to grasp onto this idea and write about it. And the book's a great read, and the idea is certainly something that all communities can benefit from. So appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today. It's a great topic, important for our cities, our universities, and those that we're wanting to be engaged with or to get engaged. So sure appreciate the time.
I appreciate the encouraging words, David. Thank you.
It's been very, very good. Well, I will, can I end my record? Yeah.